Okay, so for our interview today, I'll be asking a series of questions about your experiences with disability activism in Utah. We have an hour for our interview, so please feel free to share your stories in as much detail as you can remember.
Sure.
So to get started, tell us just a little bit about yourself and why you're here.
I'm Mark Smith, and I'd like to say I'm a disability advocate, but I'm not really that as far as my concept goes. But that's what I do. That's what I've done over the years. And the difference between me and, say, DRAC/Barbara Toomer's program was that those guys were volunteers. Those guys were, and I don't mean to say me versus them, because I am them, but at the same time, for 90% of my activism in this community, it's been on a paycheck. I've been a professional employed primarily through the Independent Living Center here in town. And then afterwards, in various other positions I've held as far as the state and as far as private nonprofit goes. So it's a little bit different as far as my thought process goes about how my activism went. I mean, I always, and again, that's why I'm always so overwhelmed and in awe of not only Barbara, of course, but the other individuals, Petiman, LaPetty, for example, and others who showed up and to the strike line and continued to be on the strike line day and night for whatever it takes, going back to DC and going to LA or wherever there happens to be a action going on, and being part of the actions here in town. I mean, I've been on a lot of actions here in town, and I've always been part of that, and I totally believe in it. Again, I came into this town in 1984, and to take the position of Community Resource Coordinator for the Independent Living Center here in town, and that's the Utah Independent Living Center. And that position broke down into two areas: transportation and housing, disability transportation, disability housing, which in 1984, transportation was at zero pretty much. They had a number of accessible bus routes, or they had a number of accessible vehicles, but John Pingree, in his commitment to whatever it was, chose not to use them. And so really frustrating to people with disabilities. And so really fortunate for me to be the person that they were going to come about anyway. And I'd like to say all because of my hard work and diligence, but no, they were coming down the line anyway. And it was fun being part of that transition to help with that transition concept. And so I wish I'd made a bigger footprint, but big enough. That's all I need. And so Barbara Toomer at the time, DRAC was not DRAC then. I mean, that was I can't even remember what the title of the operation was then. But they were basically, as my memory serves me correctly, because Barbara Toomer and Barbara Toomer was on the board of the Independent Living Center at the time, and which of course gave her great, I think, direction over the center. And I don't even remember the director's name who hired me now, but he was very much into this whole thing as well, and it's particularly the any kind of publicity he could get out of it. And he was a good guy. And again, like I say, he brought me on board. I don't know, had things been otherwise, would I have ever been hired? But they brought me on board, and Barbara she had been around for a while before I came around, and she wasn't totally into direct confrontation at that point in time, and she really had to grow into the position. And so the best part about it was the best of times as far as that there was money around, and there was transportation money, and there were transportation grants available, and there were a lot of people with disabilities flying back and forth between here in Denver and here in DC and here in San Francisco, and which were, I think, some of the major hot spots are places people with disabilities congregated. So I think they became the natural points for independent living. And I think as far as the direct confrontation movement came at the time, I don't know which, that's a chicken and the egg thing as far as I'm concerned, as far as did IL come first, or did the places like Denver and Boston and the LA particular, or not LA, but the places there in Berkeley, yeah, the Berkeley Center. I mean, those were all hotbeds of thought and all hotbeds of, in those days, in the 60s particularly, I broke my neck in 1966 in Boise, Idaho, which is similar to Salt Lake in a lot of ways. And, but being out this far west, you didn't see a lot of what was going on nationally. But like I said, there was a lot of money. And for one reason or another, I just kept volunteering for stuff because there was nothing else for me to do in Boise at the time. And I was like 15 or 16, 17 by the time I really got done with rehabs and stuff. And if you were willing to go somewhere, they were willing to ship you. So they sent me, they did all kinds of plane tickets for me. And so and one of them was, I sort of became involved with, they sent me, when I first hired on here, they sent me up to Washington. Is it Seattle? I think it was, and maybe it wasn't them. But anyway, I went to the independent living centers up in Washington, and there was a conference there of Northwest independent living centers. And I really didn't know what it was all about at that point in time. It was all brand new to me. I'd heard about it a little bit, but not a lot. And then I'd gotten to work, and then finally came down to Salt Lake. My kids moved down here, and I wanted to be closer to them. And I was just finishing work with an independent living center in Blackfoot, Idaho, of all places, and came down here in '84. And I think that following September or October, I think it was October, that they had it could have been the year after that, but it gets all hazy, but they did the bus strikes downtown in Salt Lake. And that was a DRAC, well, again, it wasn't DRAC, it was, gosh, I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was part of the Independent Living Center, but part of the Barbara's program. It was still defining itself and coming to be. And again, fortunate for me as transportation coordinator, I mean, I was expected to be part of all this. And so I wasn't a volunteer, I was paid to be there. But chances are I would have been there anyway, just because that's where the party was and that's where I probably wanted to be. Same way, and again, same true as with housing. I was pretty involved in trying to get more accessible and affordable housing in this community. Now it's just out of control. I mean, it's out of control for able-bodied people, which means it's way out of control for people with disabilities. I mean, I don't even know how they're surviving at this point in time. And it was bad enough when there was there's never really been housing, but people tend to survive, at least with some sort of affordable rents. I mean, and you have to stop me when you have to, because I'll ramble on forever, so beware.
No, this is great.
So anyway, but again, theoretically and professionally, it didn't do me any good to place anybody out in the community if there was no transportation for them, especially if they're in wheelchairs. And again, it's changed, in my opinion, for what it's worth. Independent living centers changed a little bit to where they're servicing a lot more folks with DD disabilities. And I have nothing against folks with, I mean, technically I'm developmentally disabled because I had my rec when I was 15. So, but at the same time, the beauty of the IL when I came on board, and I think nationally, was the fact that it was really the only organ out there that was working with folks that inherited their disability through trauma and through folks that were not necessarily, well, they were all developmentally disabled, but they weren't necessarily intellectually disabled, if that makes sense. And so it was a place, and again, I'm still conflicted many times, because why did I not want to be associated with the traditional DD population? And I think there's a lot of issues there, but I did feel comfortable having a place to go in my wheelchair. I mean, at that point in time, I wasn't in a power chair, I was in a manual chair, and it was just weird and great to have a place that for people who were able-bodied at one time, then became disabled. And it's just a different variance as far as that goes. And so I really felt home there. I felt that was the place. And so transportation-wise, my job was to interface with independent living, of course, but with Utah Transit Authority primarily. I mean, it doesn't say that in the job description, but when you're talking about accessible public transportation, and again, I would certainly work with over-the-road buses as far as that goes, but I worked a little bit with Trailways. It was a Trailways, I think, in those days, and I worked with railroad as far as that goes a little bit. But bottom line was they were really talking about Utah Transit Authority, and to really get them put their nose down to the grindstone and just say, hey, look, you're in for the whole yard, 9 yards, and not servicing just able-bodied folks, but folks with disabilities. And you need to have more accessible vehicles, you need to have more accessible routes, and you need to use the accessible vehicles that you have, which John wasn't doing at the time, which all focused finally to that time when, well, that was what happened, was a bunch of hot shots, what I call them, I had another name for them in those days, but a bunch of ringers came in from Denver. We brought Barbara and the center and the board of directors for the brought Atlantis in, and some of those real lightning rods that were really, these guys were in my opinion, were the cutting edge as far as direct confrontation went.
Do you remember any names?
Oh, you know, gosh, what's his name? He died a couple years ago. But Wade Blank. Wade and, who was the disabled guy? There was Wade, and there was, gosh, a couple other big names that were part of the I mean, these guys went back and really became the firestorm that was happening. But Wade Blank is the big one that I remember. Was it Atlantis? It seems like there was another name that was going on around in those days. But Atlantis, I mean, that was the IL down in, and I want to say Denver. But there were some ILs, there was some independent living stuff going on in the Boulder area at the same time. But Atlantis was the really hardcore people getting their feet dirty and their hands dirty and going to the streets and stuff. So they brought them in as ringers and as trainers for this event, for one of the events. And I think they brought them in a couple days before we did the big strikes downtown. And gosh, I want to say 84, but I bet it was 86. It was either 85 or 86 at that point. And came off the curbs about 5:15 on, gosh, it seems like it was a Thursday or Friday. I don't think it was Friday, but I think it was Wednesday or a Thursday afternoon, because I know we did it again the following day. So it could have been Wednesday and we did then Thursday, or it could have been Thursday, then hit it again on Friday. And but yeah, it was pretty intense, at least for us.
Do you want to describe what happened there in a little more detail?
My feelings, what I remember, and what I'm trying to put together in my own mind, because I am trying to write some of this down myself, just for my own benefit, But yeah, we had the pre-meetings, but, we didn't want to do something without those guys knowing first. So I think, if I remember right, it had to be, gosh, it probably had to be Thursday, because Wednesday, because part of my job for independent living as the transit coordinator is I went to every one of the UTA board meetings. And at the UTA board meeting, that's, again, I became the silent vigilant. Just, I sat back there, and it got to the point where anytime they had a question on disability stuff, they would wake me up and say, Mark, what do you think about this? And many times it took me off guard, because they're always talking about something else. But anyway, we actually did an event, because they had their big guy come in from the national UMTA, Utah, or United Mass Transit Authority, UMTA, was the big group, and they were having their national meeting, I believe, here in town at that point in time. And I wish I could remember the squirrely little guy who was the director of UMTA at that time. And I thought, it doesn't even seem like UMTA's the right name, but I think that is. So he was in town, and again, that's what we were going to strike for, because we wanted to make those guys aware, because they were going to certainly. That's why we decided, as I remember, that's why we decided that we were going to have the meeting there at Transit Authority. And I think it was the Transit Authority, I'm almost sure it was the Transit Authority, as opposed to their general meeting, because they did have a conference downtown going on. But, and we had a strike then, and I don't remember if we warned them we were going to come off the curbs downtown, but I don't think we did. I think we just said, look, this is what we want, and they pretty much told us then and there that it wasn't going to happen, and that gave us the authority in our mind. That gave us the authority that it would take to then move to a major mass transit shutdown. And then, in fact, that's what we did the following day. I think it was Thursday. And I think that day, for some reason, because I have a poem that sort of described it at one time, but you had the transit strike. We struck the buses. And it had been a warm autumn. That's right. It had been a very warm, one of those perfect Utah autumns where it's nice all the way up till one day, and all of a sudden things change. And that's what happened on that day, I remember now, is that this was one of my first major events and something like this. So this was all new to me, and it was all pretty, kind of scary in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm not a real brave guy, but so it shocked me how and this is something that's continued to shock and confront me my whole life, is that how quick, how these are just flash spots. These are just flash storms. These are just something that starts the ball rolling. And really, though it looks big and it looks super, there really is nothing at all. And I was surprised that we had this major event. We stopped the buses. People got off the buses. And on the first day, it was great. People were giving us the high five, the victory sign, everything else, slapping us on the back. We're doing good. But when we decided to do it the second day, they were ticked off. And then, I mean, that was Friday, and they were ticked. They wanted to get home. They were done with this, and they were, it was okay to pat the guys with disabilities on the head for their strike. But, this looks like it's going to be a mainline thing. It's going to be an everyday thing, but that's a whole different ball of wax. And people turn on you really quick. But what surprised me on that day was that the media was there. They did their 20 minutes. They did their interviews. We did our interviews. And people were gone. I mean, it was like 5:30, 5:45, and I was sitting alone all by myself there on where we had the strike. And it's like, wow, it's all gone. And
People were willing to get on the road.
I think we must have had, I'd say, between 10 and 20 people with disabilities. I mean, I think it was Deb Mayer, and there was me, and there was our staff, because, you know, that was a staff event, so we all went. And able-bodied staff as well as the disabled staff. And plus we had the guys up from Colorado. And we tried to get in a number of other folks from the other community. I mean, I'd been working pretty hard trying to build inroads with independent living, with especially I wanted people in there like LCPD, Legislative Coalition for People with Disabilities. I still would love to have them involved, but they were around in '84. Oh yeah, they were there. LCPD and UPC, Utah Parent Center. But those guys, and I love them to death. I love Ruth to death, but those guys were only, to my they weren't willing to go out on the streets. They weren't really to get that. They weren't going to get dirty anyway that they had to. I mean, beautiful ladies, beautiful people, but they're, in my opinion, I mean, they do a bunch of decent work, fairly good work come the legislative season. They're dressed up to the nines, and they're out there, and they want to have lunch with the legislative folks, and they want to bring their form of legislative change their way, which is a long and drawn-out process. And I mean, their kids were kids when they started in '84. Now the moms are changing. I mean, the big focus at that time was, access into public education and getting the public education thing going and all that kind of stuff. Then it slowly switched over to group homes and quality group homes and living independently as much as they could. But really, they had never really. And again, as housing coordinator, the thing I was most frightened of was these kids cycling through my office, and I'm not going to have a place to put them, and just because their parents didn't take enough time to help us develop places for these guys. And again, what I saw time and time again, because I had to do the intake on these people when they came into my program, was that, oh yeah, John's going to be okay, because, you know, when Elmer and I die, John's going to take over. He's the oldest in the family, and he's going to take care of his little brother. He's going to take care of his little sister. Bottom line, they'd never figured out John was going to get married to Betty, and Betty, that was the last thing in her mind. Though she loves the kid and everything, she didn't sign up to be a caretaker for a kid with Down syndrome, with aged Down syndrome, or any other form of DD long term. And she's not a professional. She never wanted to be a professional. That wasn't part of what she signed up for, although it may have been kind of. But so bottom line, these guys get shifted back into the system. And already into a system that's 30 months on a short waiting list to try to get into any kind of group home supported living and stuff like that. And so, and in all honesty, I think of a career that probably had some chinks in it. One of the chink was I didn't work that hard on DD folks, because I figured, and this is a cop-out, I know, but I figured they've got Governor's Council for People with Disabilities, which is basically a DD organization. They've got Utah Parent Center, and they've got these other programs, but there's nobody out there working for folks with disabilities who are just in wheelchairs trying to get on a bus, trying to do their shopping, trying to go to a movie and get to bathrooms that are accessible. And there's nobody doing that so I still kept my focus on that kind of stuff. And I certainly, as far as my job description went, we were cross disability, cradle to grave. And so we did kids, we did adolescents, we did seniors, and again, in seniors, nobody's really doing that at all in those days. And they still should be doing it now, because so frustrated, because there's just so much stuff that still needs to be done. And people are still hiding behind the local culture and the local structure. Nobody they all say they're doing it, but nobody's doing it, and still Grandma and Grandpa are being left out in the cold. One of the biggest heartbreaks I had at the time was, as a housing coordinator, these two people came to my desk, and still my parents' age people, and they sat down, and they're beaming, they're glowing as they always do, and they say, "Yeah, how you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm Sister Johnson, and this is Brother Johnson, my husband here, and we're LDS missionaries." And I'm thinking, okay. He says, "But we need a place," and one of them was in a wheelchair, and we need an accessible place. And I'm saying, "What? You can't." Anyway, I was going through this whole level, a bunch of stuff, and bottom line, I'm saying, what the heck are they coming to me for? I mean, they're part of the organization that runs this town in this country in a lot of ways, and why are they coming to me? Why can't they? I mean, they own major pieces of property downtown that are high-rise condos and apartments and stuff that they're putting the GAs into, and their general authorities from all over the world come down here on conference, and they stay in these places. Or they've got two missionaries doing the service, doing the work. Why can't they find one accessible property? And they couldn't, of course. And I went. Well, it's not like I really had the chance to talk to the guy, the overall bishop and stuff, because that's the guy who's at church. That's whose job it is. So yeah, I talked to, you talk to all the flunkies and stuff, and again, bottom line, they even push you off onto Sister, what's her name? I can't remember what it is now. Who was the top gun Relief Society president, who for some reason became her job. But bottom line, again, men need to be working in this field as well. But anyway.
Kind of thinking about like the broader picture and how the movement has evolved over time, how would you say that disability activism has changed based on your experience in the 80s, the passage of the ADA, and then the 90s to present?
I don't give it enough recognition. I think 9/10 of it was fluff, and 9/10 of it was photo ops for the Bush administration at the time. And again, Nickel did a good job. I mean, they did as good as they can, but that, in my opinion, I like Nickel, and I like a lot of the people in Nickel. Are you familiar with Nickel? National Council for Independent Living. But I got to see them as being just a corporation themselves. They were part of the game, and funny, but so I stopped going. I mean, I loved this really is a hideously long and involved story, but one of the persons I was involved with at the time was on staff, and so. I mean, these trips to exotic places, again, I think, again, in my opinion, San Francisco is the most exotic. But there are other places to go where the Nickel had their meetings, their regional meetings and stuff. And I stopped going to them because it was just, I mean, I'm that kind of a person anyway. I don't want to rain on people's parades and stuff, and so I'll just be a grouch if I went, and I could do better work. I could do better work here on my own, all by myself, with everybody gone. And so, which I did, kept the office open, answered the phones. And so, and how that tied into what we were talking about, the national efforts and stuff, how things have changed. So, in my mind of minds, what I'm seeing is that you got to have Nickel. You got to have whatever DRAC is on the national level. You got to have this stuff, but they're all bit players. It's a big movie script, and everybody has their script to play, and they do it. And again, what really frustrated, sort of spooked me, was again, Barbara and folks brought in the national folks for some reason. I mean, they were going to do some national strikes here in Salt Lake. And of course, independent living. I mean, that's the beauty of the IL movement, I guess, or the disabled movement, is that, and it took me a long time to realize, why was DRAC always having their same conferences or the same meetings at the same time that Nickel did? Then I realized all of Nickel were part of Adapt, that's what I'm thinking. All of Nickel were card-carrying adapters. Then I all sunk in on me, that's the only way they're going to get any people to these folks is, I mean, to bring in a couple hundred people looks pretty good. If you're having a national conference of one thing, showing up for a national conference of something else to do a strike, that's going to look pretty good on the 5 o'clock news. Then I realized it was all sound bites, and it was all this and that, and I guess it kind of really deflated me to a certain degree, but it had to be, I guess, and so.
Do you know if Nickel and Adapt had a formal relationship, or if it was just that folks from independent living centers?
I don't think there was ever anything written down or formal. I don't think it ever got that way. I think it was just that at some point in time, Adapt folks were Adapt folks, and Adapt folks became Nickel folks because Adapt folks turned into independent living projects when the 10 or 12 independent living contracts were released, I think, 1980. Just sticks in my mind because that's what developed. Those 10 contracts developed the IL movement as far as the formal IL movement, where they had enough money to rent a property and to, in some cases, buy wheelchair vans, in some cases, hire staff. And that really, like I said, took the ball from the volunteer group and started getting professionals. And sad as it is, the best way to kill a movement is to professionalize them, the folks, because then you're talking 8 to 5, then you're talking comp time, then you're talking insurance, and then you're talking Christmas holidays, and then you're talking, if you're a housing coordinator, I'm going to take off the week out from Christmas to New Year's, just because that's what you do when you're a professional. Which means that Joe Blow out there, who's desperately looking for housing, is getting kicked in the teeth for those 14 days that might be going on between. Not that anything would really happen anyway, but 9/10 of the job as the housing coordinator is to give hope that we're going to find. And the funniest thing, it's the greatest thing, and the funniest thing, is that hope is so powerful because these people, one way or the other, sort of became, they dropped off my lists because for one way or another, I'd like to think through direct efforts of and sometimes it was. Sometimes I knew there was a place coming open and I'd direct people to it. But again, my theory and my philosophy was to don't do a lot of direct involvement because there are other agencies and programs that were supposed to do that. And if we start doing their job, then they're going to stop doing their job, if that makes sense. And I've seen that happen so many times. But but anyway, what I'm saying is that if given enough hope, the person will find the place on their own. And they always do. They end up doing it. And it's something I would never have thought of. And they'd come up with an idea that I wouldn't have thought of, but somehow it worked for them at this point. It may have been with their priest or their bishop or their home teacher or their brother or their cousin or their counselor or somebody, the next door neighbor just happened to know somebody else who knows somebody who has an accessible apartment. And again, one of the beauty about accessible apartments is that all you have to do is be able to get into it. And so many people, when they say accessible apartments now, are trained to believe that you're talking about a roll-in shower and a toilet you can get to. and a sink you can reach, and an oven that's safe. But the bottom line, if you're desperate for housing, as many people are, especially wheelchair folks, if they can get in, I mean, if you can get in, if there's one step or one rise going in there, and you can build a small access ramp and stuff like that, the person in the wheelchair will figure out a way to live there. And I mean, it might be buckets of water outside the bathroom to wash up and stuff like that, because he can't get in the bathroom. Even, I mean, and I'm not saying that's the acceptable that's an acceptable option, but I'm saying it's a place for this person to live. And then again, when you're a person with a disability with limited income and other challenges, then all we want, and this comes back to transportation particularly, is that we don't want chauffeur drivers. We don't want big limos. We don't want buses. We don't want what is the name of the bus system here? Not the UTA, but anyway, the small buses. I can't remember. We don't want those buses, because that takes, all we want is an accessible system that you use, that we use. And the fact that we can use it with a wheelchair lift is incidental to the fact that it's on just one of if all the buses are accessible, we don't have to worry about a bus going down, because if that bus goes down, everybody's affected, not just the people with disabilities. And so are the able-bodied people are affected, and that's all we've ever wanted, because if that makes us totally part of the system, and that system is all we wanted to be is part of the system, not a specialty part, regardless of how many bells and whistles are on there. I mean, again, that's what they always tell you. So, well, this is really great. We're going to do this for you. We're going to do that for you. But that's not what we wanted. All we wanted was to get into the front door. All we wanted was to be able to get to the meeting and take part in the meeting. We don't want, in those days, it would have been called Zoom meetings. We don't want a Zoom meeting. We want to be able to get up there in a snowstorm like everybody else that has to deal with all the other problems and all the other issues like everybody else. That's all we want. We don't want any whistles and bells. We'll be okay. Don't worry about us. We'll be okay. We've been okay. And it's just a matter of getting there and being part of the system. So I think the bottom line, what I'm really saying is that, okay, the question was, have I seen changes? I think I've seen changes in that people who really want to make it to wherever they want to go can do it now than before. But even then, gosh, I was seeing someplace over today, I wish I could remember where it was at, coming in today. It totally shocked me. Oh, wow, I guess they're accessible. There's the back entrance to Desert, is it Desert Inn? What's the bar down below? Desert Edge. There was a big step in front of the window. And before I went crazy, I said, well, I'm going to go around the front, which I did, and that was accessible. So, yeah, but in the old days, that would have been the big flare-up, was that. Someplace, and again, I do know that there are places in town that still, somebody's given out permits for properties that are not accessible, that serve the public. And I don't know how they're getting around it. And again, there's nobody's job who it is to enforce this stuff. And again, sad as it is, volunteerism is great, but I mean that really is chain theory as far as the weakest link. I mean, people showing up for a function, the only way you're going to really make sure those people show up is if they're getting a paycheck to be there. But then again, that loses a part of the cutting edge that they have on the other side of that, is that if they're getting a paycheck, I mean,
You maybe lose some intensity.
oh yeah, you lose the intensity plus the antagonistic party or group says, well, yeah, they're just paid to be here. They don't really represent the real people that are out there. So again, DRAC in its glory was the fact that there are real people out there. And again, you are so brave. that you get, I mean, the best part and the worst part about DRAC is that they are the best and the worst of the people who need these kind of situations, if that makes any kind of sense. In that these people are committed. These people are in it for for what they see as the full turn of events. And a lot of it, again, one of the reasons I got out of DRAC off and on was because a lot of the people that were part of their leadership were a lot of people just using the organization for their own benefit. And again, this has been one of my biggest criticisms of DRAC over the years. And Barbara particularly, I love her to death, was that there were a lot of people whispering nice things into her ear, and she really took them seriously. And I watched her go from the great mom / grandma / ward member into this person to be used by anybody who wanted to field a group of bodies for a press release or a confrontation. I mean, the thing, I don't think it was a joke, but I think that I've heard it more than once. Well, if we need people to fill it up, let's call DRAC. Let's get DRAC out there, because they'll bring somebody, and which is good. But at the same time, you had a bunch of folks. Well, you had some folks at DRAC who were waiting for the quote hotline to give them a call, and they'd show up. And what bothered me so much over the years was that so many times they're showing up for events they had no idea what they're protesting about. They were just wound up and said, "Okay, march that direction," and off they would all go. And it was pretty funny sometimes, but sometimes it was kind of sad. And sometimes it was bothersome for me because I certainly had to clean up the mess. That's not the right term. But many times I had to deal with the press. They're saying, "Well, what do you think about this?" And I'm just sort of sitting there. And many times I didn't even realize that the DRAC had been out on an event, and they're calling me at my office and saying, "We need a soundbite from you about what your feelings are about this or that." I said, "Okay." But it was sad, I thought, in many ways. And at the same time, you got to have this kind of, you really do, I mean, you got to have this group. If you're in a town or a city or a nation, you got to have this fringe group out there, and they're going to be fringe because that's what they are, is fringe, because poor DRAC. DRAC is the group of people. They're the box of broken toys. They're the ones. They're the group that nobody else will play with. They're the folks that nobody wants to have anything to do with because they're so bizarre. They're so out there. And again, that's their selling point. That's their beauty. They're probably the closest to raw goodness that there is left anymore in our culture. And that's weird, I know, but still, I think you're smart. You understand it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
And again, you got to be the den mother. You got to be the shrink, the counselor. I mean, you get a bunch of stuff coming in that door, and you've got to sort it all out. And again, DRAC taking next step. Again, you're going to lose part of that edge, but I guess that's what you have to do. If they're going to get to the step to find someone who's got the skills to keep their little heart pumping, because otherwise they're just going to get lost. They're going to lose funding. I mean, they'd be really okay in a regular time setting when there was lots of money out there for these kind of organizations. So, again, there always needs to be a direct confrontation group in the town.
And it is hard to balance professionalism with grassroots energy.
It is. It really is. And that's a hard call. And again, Jerry's done a great job, I think. And he's taken it from where it was almost gone, I think. I mean, if you wanted to use the analogy of the body on the stretcher, somebody sitting on top of the body doing compression chest pumps. Jerry did that and again, that was even before Barbara died, I think, to a certain degree, because I don't know if Barbara ever saw where they were at. I don't think she really ever did, bless her heart. But Jerry sort of had to pull it all together, and I don't know what kind of steps he had to take, and I don't know what kind of decisions he had to make, but I do think he had the skills, and he has the skills, and I don't know what his involvement is now, but I think he was a plain good person, and that's maybe the bottom line. There's another great person who was part of that group, is Dick Lodmill. And again, Dick Lodmill, again, is not a paid staff, and I hope he's still alive. It's been a long time since
He
I've
is,
talked
yeah.
to him. Yeah.
Talked to him on the phone yesterday.
Oh, good. He's a darn right good person. There aren't many other people like him left. And he's another person, I don't know his involvement truly, he won't give up, and he won't give up on me. And so sometimes he knows I've gotten real close, just saying, look, I'm done entirely, stop calling me. But I've never really gotten to that point with him because he's so forthright and he's so committed to being there. So
I've got another big question for you.
okay, I'm sitting down.
As someone who's worked within the disability rights movement for quite a while, you've likely encountered a variety of disability groups that have different approaches to social change. We've already talked about this a little, but what can you remember about how and why you met the folks involved with DRAC in the first place, and what made DRAC different?
Well, I met DRAC because they were part of my I was never told to be part of DRAC. I was never told, but it was totally inferred as far as I was concerned. Because Barbara was on the board of directors for the Independent Living Center. Again, this is way before it was DRAC. It was Salt Lake Adapt, or whatever it was in those days. And we're not told to keep the movement going, but we are expected to be part of that group. I mean, they met at our office, and they met during work hours, and good, bad, or indifferent, I got time off. I mean, I don't know if I got time off. All I know is if I worked, 7:30 to 9 or something like that in the evening, I'd be willing to take comp time for it, and I expected to take comp time for it. So I always knew about Barbara's group, and I was always technically part of Barbara's group. And Barbara, I think, was the only board member. There may have been other board members, so I didn't know everything. Well, no, Rosemary Randon was part of DRAC, but she was also a board member for Independent Living too, and Deborah Mayer. I don't know if Deborah ever became a formal DRAC member or not. At least not after they became DRAC, no. And Maurice Campbell, that was the director of the Independent Living Center when I got hired. He may have been a DRAC member, or he was certainly strong in promoting DRAC in this community with Barbara. And he was probably, again, Barbara Barber really, in my opinion, had this strong need to be, to do what people in control wanted her to do, if that makes sense. Anyway, if the director of the Independent Living Center, who's technically your employees, but directors usually run the boards. The board says, we need to have this done, you pretty much comply with what the director tells you to do. And Campbell was pretty much that person at that time. I mean, I don't even know if the guy's still alive. I hate being at this point where I'm probably more alive than a lot of the old guys I used to work with. But, boy, Maurice, that'd be interesting to see what he would say. But Maurice Campbell's the guy's name. He used to live up in the North End, up there in Logan or Layton or something. But bring me back to point. The question was, how does IL, or how does a DRAC?
What makes DRAC different, and how did you get involved?
And again, I got involved through my work situation, and what was different was it was really grassroots. It was really street level, and it really was people who weren't really trying to shine everybody on. They were just trying to get the rights that they had. And in those days, the big commitment was accessible transit, total accessible transportation, even more so than accessible housing and all that kind of stuff, which is pretty important. But again, I think nationally, the big pill to swallow was public transit. And that really meant, it kind of meant trains, and it kind of meant taxis, and it kind of meant this and that, but bottom line, what it really meant was bus systems. And railways to a certain degree, but most people couldn't get to railways because they'd have to have a bus to get to railways.
And given that we started by focusing on transportation issues, how has that shifted leading up to present? What types of issues are on the table now?
On the table now is fine-tuning, pretty much, because, transit back in 91, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt for what is it, the ADA, as far as that goes. As far as the ADA goes, let's just use that as the point. I mean, these directors saw this coming a long time before that, and they saw, well, we're going to have to do it, so I think they dragged their feet as long as they could. But after the ADA, they hired the compliance officers. They hired the white folks inside the structure. I shouldn't say that like that, but it's bottom line, it became, a lot of MSW/social workers that couldn't get jobs anyplace else, so they got hired in those positions, I thought. And other people got hired too in those areas, but that's what it seemed like to me. And then it became a matter of converting the old employees that this is the way it's going to be. Because at that point in time, for instance, for me, I was still pushing my manual chair. And I think I was living on 9th East and, 9th East and at one point 3900 South.
Exactly, I live there now. 125 South 9th East.
125 South. Edit that down. 125 South. Yeah, 125 South, 9th East. Well, actually, I was down at 9th East. Oh, 9th East, yeah. I was down 9th East and 3900 South. And because when the bus lines first did go in, when we got accessible buses on those lines working and the lifts worked, there was State Street, 3900. Well, actually, the really first ones was State Street, the Avenues, and 5th East. But then the next bunch of buses, then the next real order of accessible buses came in. 3900 South became an accessible corridor. 45th became that corridor. They ran circles circles all day. 50 East. But so anyway, I was on, okay, the point that I'm laboring to make was that drivers still didn't want to pick you up. Drivers weren't, they were given the edict that, one, you can't be disrespectful to people with disabilities, which they still did. And then they said that if a person with a disability is at a bus stop, you must at least stop the bus. And if they can't get on by themselves, then you don't have to take them. But if they can get on, you've got to let them get on. And again, transit slash, I don't know if it was union, but drivers, aren't really supposed to leave their seat while they're driving, while they're on shift. And so my big thing was, in those days, I was still strong, I was young, and so the driver would stop and he would say, sorry, we don't have the lift on this bus line. And this was even before that, because I stopped the bus and I said, I'm coming on board. And he said, well, we don't have a lift. I said, well, that's okay. I'm just crawling on. And that's where, that became a quip that was used a great deal in other actions that we did, was the crawl on. I did the crawl on because that's what I would do. The bus would stop at 9th East and stuff, and I would crawl on and drag my chair up after me. It's really pathetic. And again, once the drivers get to know you and you're going to do that, they'll run out and at least lift your chair onto the bus by you. And I wasn't a paraplegic, I was quadriplegic. So I wasn't strong enough to lift myself onto the bus seat. I had to sit on the bus till I got down to State Street. Well, 9th East and 39th South. Yeah, down to State Street where they did have accessible bus routes. Or I could take 5th East and wander down, because the office at that time was 764 South, 2nd West. And so, but the big thing was, if you can get on the bus, they got to take you. And that's what I was telling people, that most people weren't going to crawl onto the bus. But I did, and I saw the glimmer of what this was all, what it was all about. And again, once you got to State Street, or if you're on 5th East, which we actually had an accessible apartment complex on 5th East, that we had like 7 units where we put people with disabilities in. And that technically they actually could use the system. Hardly any of them ever used the bus system, which is too bad. But they could have and they should have. But again, the question is, what's the difference, right? What's the difference? The difference is now we have something to hold on to still beg for our rights. And we shouldn't have to beg. And it shouldn't be a matter of even having to even come up to the plate again. But, you're still having to say, hey, look, you're not in compliance. That's why these, if you got an organization big enough to have a compliance officer, that they're having problems complying. And so that, I think that says it all, is that you still have directors, you still have, you still have directors and you still have managers that see the ADA as a way to make them be less than perfect. And so if they have to stop and do what they're doing, they don't want to do it. And again, if you got a bus system or a front end office that says we can only allocate, say, 30 seconds to load or unload a person off the bus. And that's got to include getting them on the bus, getting them back there and tying them down and everything else. Then, as a person with a disability, you just become a widget again. And then in truthfulness, maybe that's the good thing, is because everybody's a widget. Whether you're a wheelchair person or the able-bodied person sitting on the corner waiting for the bus, that person's got it. The bus is going to stop for that person. And luckily, under his own power, he's not going to cut into that driver's possible time that he's going to be adjudicated on. But if it's a wheelchair person, just to run the cycle through the lift is going to cost him time. And so what are we doing now? The question is now we're having to do, if you get the transit, I mean, I've done this over the years, but on just to pick up a few extra bucks and riding undercover, and that's basically sitting on the bus stop, waiting for the bus driver to either pick you up, or especially they would bring me in when there was some sort of issue about the same driver passing people by with disabilities for one reason or another. So my job, they'd pass me by, clock the time, look at the bus number and what route it was, file it, and then I guess somewhere along the line, the manager calls the guy in and says, look, we've got 4 reports that you passed Joe Blow at that stop at 5:30 in the evening when he's trying to get home from work. What's the problem here? And so then that guy's got to work it through, whatever he is. And that's what the ADA is doing on that level. But again, that was going through, that was actually being pushed through before the ADA went through. But again, it's all that thing was that they knew it was coming. I mean, the ADA was just a piece of fireworks that said, okay, these people matter. These people have a rationale for doing what they're doing, and we're giving them validation. And again, that's the other thing too, is the ADA validates you as a human being. And again, it's sad that it has to be. Well, the biggest validator is if that person on the other side of you has any money in their pocket, which is still sort of crass, but it's true. We did a play on the consequence of being real or something. I can't remember the name of it. But the idea was that if you have money in your pocket, you become visible. Depending on how visible you want to be is how much money you have in your pocket. And the joke in the play was if you had plastic, if you had a credit card, then you became very brilliant and very visible because you are part of that system at that point in time, even more than having just cash. But cash goes a long way. But so the ADA and so it gave the people validity, and I think DRAC also gives the people validity, if nothing else, being a dull weapon to weaponize a group of people against an administration system or whatever, that if they don't do what their bottom line says they're supposed to do, then these people will move on you, and you don't want them to move on you. And it's sad. Again, coming full turn, every system needs a direct action confrontation system, and DRAC's it for this town.
Yeah. I've got one last question for you. I'd like to talk a little bit about what it's like to work within a movement where so many different members have different disabilities and sometimes dramatically different life experiences. From your perspective, what is it that brings everyone together in the disability rights movement or within a specific organization?
Well, within a specific organization, whether it's like, I'm trying to think of what's it called, the heart disease group, or say, there's whatever specific disability group that's out there, and there's a lot of them. I can't believe how many there are. Whether it's Utah Parent Center, who traditionally says that they fight for everybody with disabilities, which they do. But the bottom line is they're fighting for the moms of kids with disabilities. And that's good too, because I'm glad these people have a front. Same way with Utah Parent Centers. I say that at first, UPC, and then the same way with the group I used to be on with the Governor's Council for People with Disabilities. That was my last workstation, actually, with the state. And they've got over the Utah Developmental Disabilities Council. But they too are doing, I think, a lot of great work and working with folks with developmental disabilities. And last part, what's the other part of the question?
What does it take to bring people together with such different experiences?
I think the overall adhesive device is just, not to make it too basic, but really bottom line is not to get all pseudo-Christian on you or anything, but just do unto others as you want you have them do unto you. And to paint that with as broad a brush as you can, because really everybody is one step away from being a person with a disability, if nothing more than if you live long enough, you're going to become geriatric, and you're going to get all the disabilities rolled into one. Everything from being able to communicate, being able to walk, being able to get up, being able to find accessible transportation, be able to have, and again, this is a biggie that should be, I mean, European countries have it down, we don't. But, the whole thing of having a person live out their days in their own property, as having to go to long-term care and all that kind of stuff that person shouldn't even have to consider, shouldn't have to be a fear in the back of their mind. But even me, in the back of my mind, I mean, I'm afraid every time I transfer, because I live by myself now, and I live in an apartment, and praise the Lord, I can still dress myself and all that kind of stuff by myself, pretty much. I have medical people come in 3 times a week at this point, do home care, but I know that even though they say they don't, I know the local fire department sort of has this mental note of every time I have to call them because my transfer didn't go well and I landed between my chair and my bed. And for some reason I can't get, that hasn't happened for a couple of years, knock on wood. And I don't know if the counter resets itself. But I know that somewhere, if I were to call for the fire people to come out maybe 3 times a month, somewhere someone's ticker's going to say, well, maybe we need, what is it, adult dependent ADC, what is it, the group that covers seniors, adult disability, no, ADR, it's the folks that get involved when seniors are being either discriminated against or become, but probably more to the point, become dangerous to themselves because they can't live independently. I had a good friend who was over that for a number of years at the state. But anyway, whether it's that group, and there's a number of other state agencies that get involved when the family can no longer meet the responsibilities of caring for this individual. So, but yeah, in the back of my mind, I every time I have this list of things I count off every time before I go to bed at night, before I roll into bed, literally. And that allows me to make sure, I put my phone on my pillow so I can reach it if I have to, because I've been in that spot of trying to scream loud enough to get somebody else in the apartments to hear me. And I think when I first moved in there, I had the fire engines over twice, at least for that particular issue. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I know there's somebody ticking things off that once it gets past a certain level, they're going to say, you might want to think of assisted living. You might want to be thinking of more group living type of a scenario than what you're in right now. And I'm in senior living, and man, that's pretty pathetic. But maybe I guess that's where I need to be. And that's a big pill to try to swallow. But then again, holy cow, I'm 70 years old. It's amazing. It's just amazing. But anyway, I'm babbling. So did that answer that pretty much?
Yeah. Are there any other topics that we haven't touched on today that you feel are important to share?
No, not really. I wish, maybe it's a gripe, that when I was living in Murray when I turned like 65 or something, and we lived really close to the senior center there. I thought, wow. So I thought, well, I turned 65 and retired. Thought, I'm going to head down there. And the place, the place is basically accessible, of course, physically. But, you try to work out in the weight room, you can't reach anything because they've got everything packed into this little bitty room. They've got the universal gym, and they've got all the other stuff in there packed so tight, able-bodied people will have a hard time. There's no room there for wheelchairs. As a matter of fact, there's nothing there for wheelchairs. There's nothing there for wheelchairs at that Murray one, I thought, because I thought it'd be really cool. I thought it'd be Beach Boys in the afternoon and be rock and roll on Saturdays and Friday evenings, but it was still old guys wearing white shoes and like going to dinner with their wives dressed up in this senior environment. How did the 60 people let that go? How did we let that go? I still can't get over this. And again, then when I'm now living at Plymouth View Apartments, which is, luckily, I'm on the board of directors of the parent organization of that. Not that that's important. What's important was that got me a place when I needed it. But what's important also is the fact that I'm trying to bring some change there, and it's really hard. And I'm on the inside, and I can't do it. And that's not assisted living. It's not that. It's senior living. And there's all these different changes, all these different things. And I just am surprised there's nothing there. I was thinking there would be something there for people with disabilities, not necessarily, when I say it doesn't make sense, but not necessarily disabled, but seniors. But bottom line is, so the point I was making was that right next to my apartment complex is the Taylorsville Senior Center, and it's the same thing. They have, if you're able-bodied, that place is for you. I mean, they have, dancing, and they have whatever old people do at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whether it's communicative Spanish or whatever it is. But the bottom line, it's not for wheelchair people, and the place isn't accessible, really. I mean, it's technically accessible, but it's not accessible. I mean, if I want something, you got to ask somebody to go get something to do it. There's no real programming for wheelchair folks. And again, the weight room's not accessible, and there's other things that aren't accessible, but some things are kind of accessible, but there isn't a whole lot of accessible. And so I guess what I'm saying is that, yeah, it's surprising. It's one of these little things that nobody's making any noise about, and nobody's trying to bring change in that, because everyone's going to be dead in a few years anyway.
And it's surprising in this day and age how little some people know about accessibility in a space like that.
Yeah, because everybody feels, well, that's taken care of, especially there. It's got to be. But the bottom line, it's still being run by a bunch of 50s age thought process people. They've bought into that whole thing of slacks and knit shirts and white deck shoes at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and everything done by 5. It's bizarre. And I don't know if we're ever going to get past that. I was really believing the 60s generation would change all this. And maybe they have for those. I mean, the bottom line is, and we haven't even got into that, so we don't want to go there. But the fact is that you have a population that's just basically living hand to mouth. I mean, you got good people down in the corner with a piece of cardboard trying to get $1 for every light cycle that changes. And I don't begrudge them that. I don't begrudge them if they have a good day and make $300. More power to them. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do with their money. That's another thing. That's not my business. But my business is these guys are surviving, and this is how you survive when you're living on a fixed income And we're living in a culture and a society that has all kinds of systems built in to screw you, that no one has to be responsible because it's their job, it's their job, it's their job, and nobody's job is taking care of the person, not that you have to be taken care of. But we do need to take care of our people, and it's not being done. And maybe that's hopefully the next step, one way or the other, that can do it.
Great.
Did I talk too long? Sorry.
No, we really appreciate it. We had some extra time because you got here a little bit early, so
Hey.
that was perfect.
All right.